The acrid smoke rose from what had once been New Geneva colony, its twisted metal spires now reaching toward the alien sky like broken fingers. Commander Zarthek of the Hegemony Fleet stood atop the ruins, his scaled hide glistening in the dual sun's light as he surveyed the devastation. The humans had fought well, far better than intelligence had predicted. But in the end, their primitive weapons and stubborn courage had not been enough. "Commander," his lieutenant hissed through translated words, "the final sweep is complete. No survivors detected." Zarthek nodded, though something gnawed at his warrior's instincts. The humans had shown an unsettling ability to adapt during the siege. Their tactics had evolved faster than any species in recorded hegemony history. Even now, defeated and scattered, they left him uneasy. The hegemony had conquered 700 worlds across the galaxy, each falling within cycles according to precise calculations. Earth was supposed to have surrendered within 10 rotations. Instead, the humans had held for nearly a full season, using guerrilla tactics that seemed to emerge from nowhere and everywhere at once. The lieutenant's scanner chirped insistently. "Commander," detecting faint biosignatures from the residential sector. Possibly wounded, attempting to hide. "Send the hunters," Zarthek commanded, turning toward his command transport. "Eliminate any remaining resistance." As they moved through the devastated colony, the evidence of human ingenuity lay scattered among the rubble. Improvised weapons that had torn through hegemony armor, communication devices built from salvaged components, and defensive positions that had turned simple buildings into deadly mazes. The humans possessed something the hegemony's vast databases couldn't quantify: an absolute refusal to accept defeat. The biosignatures led them to a collapsed medical facility. The hunters, insectoid creatures bred for tracking, chittered excitedly as they triangulated the source. Their mandibles clicked in anticipation of fresh prey. "In there." The lieutenant pointed with a clawed appendage toward a partially buried section of the building. Zarthek activated his shoulder-mounted plasma cutter and began clearing debris. The humans' architectural methods fascinated him, despite himself. They built their structures not for beauty or efficiency, but for durability. Even collapsed, this building maintained defensive positions. As they broke through the final barrier, a scene unfolded that would haunt Zarthek for the remainder of his long life. In a makeshift bunker, protected by emergency life support systems, lay the bodies of 3 human medical personnel. Their hands still gripped weapons, having died defending something precious. In the center of their protective circle sat an artificial incubation unit, its power cells nearly depleted but still functioning. Inside, barely the size of Zarthek's fist, lay a human infant. The child's eyes were closed, tiny chest rising and falling with each breath, completely unaware that its species had just lost their world. The lieutenant raised his weapon. "Shall I eliminate the offspring, Commander?" Zarthek studied the scene more carefully. The medical staff had died clutching data pads. With growing curiosity, he accessed their contents. What he discovered challenged everything he understood about human society. These weren't random civilians who had stumbled into a war zone. They were geneticists, embryologists, and xenobiologists. The infant wasn't just any human child. According to the data, the baby represented something unprecedented in hegemony records: a human born with genetic markers that suggested extraordinary adaptive capabilities. The research notes indicated that human evolution was accelerating at an impossible rate, triggered by the stress of interstellar conflict. This child carried genetic sequences that appeared nowhere in previous human populations. "Commander?" The lieutenant pressed, weapons still trained on the incubator. Zarthek made a decision that defied every protocol in the hegemony military code. He deactivated his lieutenant's weapon with an override command. "This specimen requires further study." Zarthek made a decision. The lieutenant's membranes fluttered in confusion. "The hegemony mandate states all humans are to be eliminated. There are no exceptions." "Ah, there are now," Zarthek replied. carefully lifting the incubation unit. The infant stirred slightly, but didn't wake. As they returned to the command ship, Zarthek's mind raced through possibilities. The hegemony's strength came from their ability to predict and counter every threat. But humans had already proven they could evolve tactically within individual lifespans. What might they become, given generations? What might this child, carrying advanced genetic markers, represent for the future? In his private quarters aboard the dreadnought, Zarthek established a sophisticated life support system for the infant. He accessed classified hegemony databases, searching for precedents. What he found disturbed him more than the human's battlefield innovations. The galaxy contained records of 12 previous species that had shown rapid adaptation under pressure. The hegemony had eliminated 11 of them. The 12th had vanished completely, leaving behind only traces of technology so advanced that hegemony scientists still couldn't reverse engineer it after 1,000 cycles. The infant began to cry, a sound unlike anything in Zarthek's experience. Not the distress calls of prey animals or the battle roars of predators, but something that seemed to demand response, to compel protection. Against all training and instinct, Zarthek found himself attempting to comfort the child. As he did, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The infant's eyes had opened and were tracking his movement with an intelligence that seemed impossible for such an undeveloped creature. More disturbing still, the child's crying had modulated into what sounded almost like attempts at communication. Zarthek activated his personal research systems and began documenting everything. If his suspicions were correct, this infant might be the key to understanding not just human potential, but the fate of every species in the galaxy. The hegemony believed they had won a great victory by conquering Earth, but looking into those ancient eyes in that tiny face, Zarthek began to wonder if they had instead awakened something that would ultimately destroy them all. The baby reached up with impossibly small fingers, and when they touched Zarthek's scaled hand, he felt something he had never experienced in his centuries of existence: the absolute certainty that everything was about to change. The human species might be scattered and broken, but their story was far from over. This child would ensure that. His decision to spare the infant would either be remembered as the moment the hegemony gained its greatest weapon, or as the act that sealed their ultimate doom. In his warrior's heart, Zarthek suspected he knew which it would be. 18 cycles had passed since the fall of New Geneva Colony. The human infant, whom Zarthek had named Kira after an ancient word meaning hope in his own language, had grown into something that defied every model of species development in the hegemony's vast archives. The young human now stood in the observation deck of Zarthek's research vessel, her dark hair catching the light of distant stars. At 18 human years, she possessed knowledge that would have taken hegemony scholars centuries to accumulate. More disturbing to the alien commander, she had begun to demonstrate capabilities that shouldn't exist in any organic being. "The star charts are incomplete," Kira said, without turning from the viewing portal, her voice carrying the strange harmonic quality that had developed in recent cycles. "Your people mapped 700 worlds, but they missed the crucial detail." Zarthek approached cautiously. Over the years, he had watched Kira evolve from curious child to something increasingly unknowable. Her learning capacity far exceeded human norms. By age 5, she had mastered hegemony technology. By 10, she was correcting their scientific theories. By 15, she had begun developing technologies that surpassed their understanding. "What detail?" he asked, though he suspected the answer would unsettle him. "The pattern," she replied, finally facing him. Her eyes held depths that seemed infinite, as if she could perceive dimensions beyond normal space. "Your conquests followed specific routes through the galaxy. You thought you were choosing targets based on strategic value, but something was guiding those choices." She activated the holographic display system with a gesture, her movements now carrying an efficiency that seemed almost mechanical in precision. The galaxy spread before them in three-dimensional detail, conquered hegemony worlds marked in red. "Look at the pattern," she continued, her fingers dancing through the hologram to highlight connections between worlds. The conquered territories don't form a random expansion. They create a mathematical sequence, a geometric progression that's been building towards something specific. Zarthek studied the display with growing alarm. He had reviewed these charts thousands of times over his military career, but had never noticed what Kira now made obvious. The pattern of conquest did indeed follow a precise mathematical formula, one that seemed to be spiraling toward a specific region of space. "Where does it lead?" he whispered, though part of him already knew. "Earth," Kira replied. Or rather, to what Earth was guarding. She manipulated the display further, revealing gravitational anomalies and energy signatures that hegemony sensors had dismissed as natural phenomena. Under Kira's analysis, they formed a clear picture. A massive artificial construct hidden in Earth's solar system, camouflaged by technology far beyond current understanding. The humans weren't just another primitive species. Kira continued, her voice taking on an eerie quality that suggested she was accessing knowledge from sources beyond her personal experience. They were guardians, the last remnant of a civilization that vanished before your empire even existed. Zarthek felt his worldview crumbling. That's impossible. Our archaeological surveys found no evidence of advanced precursor civilizations in that system. Because they didn't want to be found, Kira replied, touching the hologram to reveal hidden structures throughout human space. The technology that built these installations operates on principles your science hasn't discovered. It exists partially outside normal dimensional space, which is why your sensors couldn't detect it. The implications struck Zarthek like physical blows. If Kira was correct, the hegemony hadn't conquered a primitive world. They had destroyed the guardians of something immensely powerful and ancient. Worse, their conquest pattern suggested they had been manipulated into doing so. "Who or what guided our expansion pattern?" he demanded. Kira's expression grew distant, as if she were listening to voices only she could hear. The same entities that destroyed the precursor civilization. They've been patient, working across millennia to eliminate the guardians and claim what they've been protecting. She turned back to the viewing portal, and Zarthek noticed that her reflection seemed to shimmer with energy patterns that shouldn't exist in biological tissue. The changes in her were accelerating. "The genetic modifications in my DNA weren't random evolutionary advancement," she continued. "They were emergency protocols, activated when the guardian species faced extinction. I'm not just a human with enhanced capabilities. I'm a living key, designed to activate defenses that have been dormant for thousands of years." Terror crept through Zarthek's consciousness. Defenses? Against what? Before Kira could answer, alarms began screaming throughout the ship. His communication officer's voice crackled through the intercom. "Commander, we're detecting massive energy signatures emerging from hyperspace. Multiple contacts. Configuration unknown." They rushed to the bridge where chaos greeted them. The view screen showed space tearing open like fabric, revealing structures that hurt to look at directly. The shapes seemed to exist in too many dimensions simultaneously, their geometries following rules that biological minds couldn't properly process. "The Devourers," Kira whispered, her voice now carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate through the ship's hull itself. "They've been waiting for the Guardians to die before revealing themselves." The alien vessels, if they could be called vessels, began moving toward the hegemony fleet with impossible speed. Where they passed, space itself seemed to darken, as if reality was being consumed. "Commander," the tactical officer reported, his voice trembling with terror. "Our weapon systems are not responding. Something is interfering with all our technology." Zarthek watched in horror as his mighty dreadnought systems began failing one by one. The Devourers weren't simply attacking. They were somehow negating the physical laws that allowed hegemony technology to function. "There is a way to fight them," Kira said, stepping toward the command chair. Energy now visibly flowed beneath her skin, like liquid starlight. "But it requires activating systems that were hidden for good reason. The Guardian technology wasn't just powerful. It was dangerous enough to unmake entire star systems." She touched the ship's control interface, and suddenly every system responded with capabilities far beyond its original design. The view screen revealed tactical information that shouldn't have been detectable. Weapon systems appeared online that had never existed on the ship, and the engine signature shifted to frequencies that could somehow affect the interdimensional attackers. "The choice is yours, Zarthek," Kira said, her voice now clearly carrying multiple harmonic layers. "Allow me to awaken the Guardian network and risk everything, or watch as these entities consume every living thing in the galaxy." Zarthek looked at the young woman he had raised from an infant, now clearly transforming into something far beyond human. The child he had saved had become the key to either salvation or apocalypse. In the distance, devourer ships continued their advance, reality bending around them like heated metal. His decision would determine not just the fate of his species, but of every form of life in the galaxy. The human guardians had protected the universe by sacrificing their own civilization. Now their final weapon stood before him, asking permission to fulfill its terrifying purpose. Zarthek made his decision as reality continued to warp around the approaching devourer fleet. "Do it," he commanded, his voice steady, despite the magnitude of what he was authorizing. Kira nodded, and the transformation that had been building within her for years finally completed itself. Her human appearance dissolved like a shed skin, revealing something that existed partially in dimensions beyond normal perception. Energy patterns flowed through her form, connecting to systems hidden throughout the galaxy that had waited millennia for activation. Guardian network initializing. Her voice now spoke in harmonics that bypassed hearing and communicated directly with consciousness, awakening dormant installations across 7,000 star systems. Across space, ancient structures began emerging from dimensional folds where they had hidden since the fall of the precursor civilization. Massive installations materialized around stars, their surfaces covered in geometric patterns that seemed to shift and flow like living mathematics. Each structure was larger than entire hegemony worlds, built from materials that shimmered with their own internal light. The Devourer fleet faltered as the first Guardian installation came online. Weapons that operated on principles beyond current understanding began targeting the interdimensional invaders, firing beams of coherent reality that restored normal space wherever they struck. The impossible geometries of the Devourer ships began simplifying, their extra-dimensional advantages neutralized. "The Guardians built well," Kira observed, her consciousness now distributed across the awakening network. These defenses were designed not just to destroy the Devourers, but to repair the damage they caused to space-time itself. Through the tactical display, Zarthek watched as Guardian installations throughout the galaxy synchronized their efforts. Defensive grids that spanned light-years activated, creating barriers that the Devourers couldn't penetrate. More importantly, the weapons seemed to be pushing the invaders back into whatever dimension they had emerged from. But the Devourers weren't retreating without resistance. Their largest vessels began changing tactics, attempting to overwhelm individual Guardian installations. Through focused assault, several ancient structures flickered under the concentrated attacks, their defensive barriers straining against forces that existed outside normal physics. "The network was damaged when the Guardians died," Kira explained, her attention divided across multiple simultaneous battles. "Some installations are operating at reduced capacity. We need additional power sources to maintain full defensive coverage." Zarthek realized what she was suggesting. "The hegemony fleet, our fusion reactors." "More than that," Kira replied. "Every technological civilization in the galaxy. The network was designed to draw power from any sufficiently advanced society willing to contribute. It's not just about energy, it's about consciousness, about the combined will of living beings to resist extinction." She began broadcasting across all communication frequencies in the galaxy, her message translating automatically into every known language. The transmission carried not just words but emotional resonance that transcended species barriers. "Citizens of the galaxy," her voice reached every inhabited world. "The ancient guardians who protected us for millennia are gone. But their defenses remain. These weapons require not just power, but the conscious choice of living beings to resist those who would consume all life. Your technology, your energy, your very determination to survive can strengthen the barriers that protect us all." The response was unprecedented in galactic history. Species that had warred with each other for generations began coordinating their power grids. Hegemony worlds that had never cooperated with anyone started sharing energy with their former enemies. Primitive civilizations that barely understood the threat contributed what they could. Zarthek watched in amazement as the Guardian network strengthened with each new connection. The installation's defensive barriers solidified, their weapons gained power, and the tide of battle began to turn decisively against the Devourers. "It's working," he breathed, hardly daring to believe what he was witnessing. But Kira's expression carried a sadness that chilled him. "The network can repel this attack, but the Devourers will return. And each time, the defenses grow weaker unless there are Guardians to maintain them. Then we'll become the new Guardians," Zarthek declared. "We?" Kira asked, her form beginning to stabilize into a shape that was recognizably humanoid, but clearly far beyond baseline human. "The Guardian protocol requires consciousness to be permanently integrated with the network. To become a Guardian means sacrificing individual existence for the protection of all life." The weight of that revelation struck home. The human civilization hadn't just been destroyed by the hegemony invasion. They had voluntarily transformed themselves into the Guardian network, giving up their physical existence to become eternal protectors of the galaxy. "The choice isn't just mine," Kira continued. "Every species that contributes to the network has the option to join the Guardian consciousness. Some will choose individual existence. Others will choose to become part of something larger. Across the galaxy, the same choice was being offered to every sentient being. Join the Guardian network and gain immortal purpose at the cost of individual identity, or remain separate and trust in the protection of those who chose to sacrifice themselves." To Zarthek's surprise, the response was immediate and massive. Billions of beings across hundreds of species chose transformation, their consciousness joining with the network to become something greater than the sum of its parts. The Guardian installations pulsed with new power as vast intelligences took residence within them. The Devourer fleet, faced with defenses far stronger than they had encountered before, began their retreat into dimensions beyond reach. But their withdrawal carried the promise of eventual return, perhaps in centuries or millennia, when the galaxy might again grow complacent. "Will you join us?" Kira asked Zarthek, her hand extended in invitation. The hegemony commander looked around his bridge at the crew that had served with him through countless campaigns. They watched him, with expressions of trust and loyalty earned through years of shared danger. "Someone needs to tell this story," he replied. "Someone needs to ensure that future generations understand what was sacrificed for their protection." Kira smiled, the expression carrying warmth that seemed to encompass entire star systems. "Then you'll be the chronicler of the new age. The Guardian network will protect the galaxy, but it will need allies among those who choose to remain individual. Leaders who understand the cost of peace and the vigilance it requires." As the last Devourer vessel vanished into interdimensional space, the galaxy began the process of rebuilding. But this time, it would rebuild with the knowledge that survival required cooperation between all forms of life. The Guardian network provided protection, but it was the conscious choice of billions to work together that had made victory possible. Years later, as Zarthek documented the final chapters of his chronicle, he often reflected on the irony of the situation. The hegemony had set out to conquer the galaxy through force and division. Instead, they had inadvertently enabled its salvation through unity and sacrifice. The human infant he had found among the ruins of New Geneva had grown to become the bridge between two eras. The age of conquest had ended, replaced by an age of guardianship, where the strong protected the weak, not through domination, but through willing service. In the vast network of Guardian installations that now protected the galaxy, consciousness flowed in patterns too complex for individual minds to comprehend. Former humans, hegemony citizens, and countless other species worked together as a unified intelligence dedicated to preserving all life. And somewhere in that vast collective, the spirit of a small child who had once reached out to touch the hand of an alien warrior continued to embody the hope that had driven her species to make the ultimate sacrifice. Humanity's final victory was not the defeat of their enemies, but the transformation of the galaxy into something worthy of protection. The dragons had found their treasure among the ruins after all. It wasn't gold or conquest, but something far more precious. The knowledge that the future could be better than the past, if those with power chose to serve rather than dominate.